Any good stories from the road?
Pipe up.
I wish we'd gotten seen a little bit more out of our punter.
I'm starting to puke.
It makes my stomach hurt.
I thought he was going to die.
I'm starting to throw up in my mouth a little bit.
He's on the probiotics.
Is Georgia playing the 1985 Bears this weekend or what?
A lot of Todd talk.
Rat poison proof.
They're mongoose.
We will not be hunted at the University of Georgia. I can promise you that. The hunting that we do will be done from us going the other direction.
Welcome to the Georgia Show. It is Vandy week, homecoming weekend, and we invite you right out of the gates here to hit subscribe on the DawgsHQ YouTube channel. Thank you for tuning into the Georgia Show. Already got a comment here from Miles Exley. How about them Dogs? Hoping to see a healthy dose of Beck and Vandegrift this week. I think if it's a healthy dose, then that means things are going all right for Georgia. Doing this a couple days later than we normally do. Jake Rowe, Palmer Toms, how we doing this week, fellas?
Doing great, man. Just lost my voice at the Braves game.
Yeah, you sound like you're doing
good. Yeah, lost my voice at the Braves game on Tuesday night, Wednesday night, whenever it was. So trying to get that back, but otherwise doing pretty good.
Yeah, I'm over here getting ready for parents to come into town for homecoming week. Nashville, family making the trip down for the Vanderbilt game. So gotta get the house all in order.
No, you don't. No, you don't. You don't need to pretend. They know what the score is. When parents come into town for you, Palmer, where do y'all like to go eat?
We're trying Marker 7 tonight. We're going to try to get in there, but
Solid.
It may be an earlier dinner just because we're trying to get in there. They have not been. I have not been. I've heard great things about it, but it went last time that didn't work out. We ended up at Chuck's, which is, you
can do worse.
You can do a lot worse.
Yeah, I just got back from St. Simon's for a few days. I've had enough fish. I think I'm starting to grow scales. So you enjoy your Marker 7. I'm going to be recouping a little bit. Guys, let's talk about Georgia and Vandy. I know everyone's excited about the Commodores coming into town as always. I did see on Good Morning America, they had the homecoming crowd for Athens already firing up, and we'll get into that a little bit later, but it's a great time of year for it. It's a great game for it, and I don't think Georgia typically has to worry too much about Vandy using this as bulletin board material. It's gotten them a couple times, got them in Kirby Smart's first year, but this season feels a little bit different, even though the Dogs are under a different kind of microscope as the defending champs. Seems like a lot of things are big concerns when in other years they may not be. Let's start at the mailman position, Stetson Bennett. Jake, you've been covering this. You've canvassed this all week. Kirby Smart mentioned that Stetson may be dinged up. Let's get right into that one. What's the latest on Stetson Bennett's health?
I don't think it's a prohibitive, he's banged up. This is going to really affect his play a ton. I do think, though, that in kind of checking with some people I trust, that it did affect Georgia's game plan a little bit for Auburn. I think they tried to be a little more safe early on, maybe try to prevent it from getting worse, not let Stetson get hit. That didn't work out. That didn't look very good. And, I know that I wasn't the only person kind of saying, man, what are we looking at here? With that said, I do think that, to the best of their ability, they're going to continue to be cautious with Stetson and try to get him fully healthy. And I think that'd be, this week, I fully expect a steady dose of the ground game, and for Georgia to really want to get that going into the bye, give them that extra week to heal up, and then kind of get after it there. And I've been including the Florida game kind of in that November swing because it's so close to November. But that's the section of Georgia season they've got to worry about, that they've got to get there. If you told Kirby Smart, hey, right now I'll give you a 1-point win over Vanderbilt, no extra injuries, and then everybody else is healthy after the bye, I think you'd take it. Yeah.
I mean, Wes and I were just talking about, how banged up this team is, recapping some of those injuries, for this team before we were recording. And, there's certainly a lot of them. So I do agree with you there, Jake. I think that that quote unquote November stretch, and we do include Florida there, has always been the 4-game stretch that you circle on this calendar, on this schedule from the start. And I completely agree with you. If Kirby was given that option of, hey, 1-point win over Vanderbilt, everybody's healthy, coming out of the bye, you're ready to roll, your football team is at full strength going into that stretch, I definitely think he would take that. But think that we might see another limited, like you said, heavy dose of the ground game, limited game plan here on both sides of the ball. Obviously, you're not going to have Jalen Carter. I probably doubt that you're going to see much of Smile Munden and Tresman Marshall. They may play, they may be limited, but I think that they feel good with what they have in Ryan Davis. They certainly feel good with what they have in Jamon Dumas-Johnson, and they feel like they've got talented players there in Ryan Davis and Xavier Sori at that inside linebacker spot where they can work those guys back in, ease them back in. The D-line has done well without Jalen Carter, and we certainly saw what the running backs were capable of without Kendall Milton last week.
Yeah, sets me up nicely for my next talking point, which is Branson Robinson. And he's the SEC Freshman of the Week for good reason. He shredded Auburn, and we've spoken on this show before about how a good running attack, a huge play in the running game, whether it's an explosive one like Stetson's or just a physical performance like Branson had against the Tigers, how that can energize a team. What do you guys expect out of him in his development in Georgia's offense? It seems like it took him a few weeks to really get there to where Georgia needed him to be. But with Kendall Milton being out and limited, Branson Robinson finally seemed like he was ready to take that opportunity and make the most of it.
It was right around this time, Wes, back in 2007. It was Vanderbilt before Florida, Vanderbilt before the bye week before Florida. If I'm not mistaken, I may have the bye week part messed up, where it kind of, you'd seen some flashes from Noshawn Moreno, who was a redshirt freshman, but he hadn't really taken the reins yet. And then some injuries, more than what Georgia's dealing with now, by the way, kind of had forced him to, really take the reins of the running back position. He had a big game against Vanderbilt, big game against Florida, came out and had one of the best, seasons of a Georgia running back in the history of the program. So I think, Branson Robinson's going to have an opportunity in this game because Kenny McIntosh is a guy I still think they can use him any way they want, but I think they want to use him a certain way, especially with him still trying to battle back from that thigh contusion. So it's Branson Robinson and it's Dejon Edwards kind of carrying the mail. They're the guys. They're the workhorses here. And I think this is an opportunity for him. This is an opportunity to get his confidence up, to get the ball rolling, so to speak. He did that last week. If he can build on that this week, I think Georgia has really put itself in a good position, because one of the things you also have to consider here is through 5 games, there wasn't a whole lot of tread on those tires. I mean, there's just not. I mean, a dozen to 20 carries maybe in a 5-game stretch. He has 12 now. I mean, you're talking about a guy that when you get down into November, we talk about it, Tennessee, Mississippi State, Kentucky, you can lean on 22 because he didn't take the beating earlier in the season that maybe some other guys did. And I think that's a really key point and something that Georgia has in his back pocket there.
We heard from Broderick Jones this week, and I thought he had a pretty funny account of the first time he saw Branson Robinson. And when you see photos of Branson as a recruit, I know a lot of Georgia fans did. Obviously, that's going to get you excited about what he can bring to the table. But to hear it from a Georgia player and an offensive lineman at that, I think y'all will appreciate what Broderick had to say about 22 here.
The time I saw him, he was in the locker room and he had his shirt off. I'm like, who is this? Like, he makes me look good. I was like, yo, you got to put a shirt on around here. You're too big.
You're too big. You're too big. And that's what Georgia needs. What do y'all think about this Georgia running back room? I think it was kind of a mystery at first this season with Kenny McIntosh being that Swiss Army guy to an extent, but primarily being someone that looks like Georgia wanted to use in a lot of its passing downs and not necessarily lean on him too much between the tackles. But do y'all feel like Georgia's running back room, even with Kendall Milton's health being what it is as a whole, do you feel like it's starting to take shape, some of those running back rooms that we've seen in years past where Georgia can hit you with any one of its running backs?
I do. I mean, I absolutely do. And I think that Auburn game was big for that. Go back to the fourth quarter of that Missouri game. That was big for that. Going back to what Jake said earlier here about Branson Robinson, 14 carries in 4 games, did not play against Missouri, did not see the field against Missouri there, but 14 carries in those first 4 games, 12 against Auburn. No Sean Marino. Jake, you are correct. It was at Vanderbilt before a bye week. 157 yards on 28 carries. Turns that into 4 straight 100-yard games, including 188 and 3 touchdowns at Florida versus Florida. 3 touchdowns the week after that, 2 against Auburn, 1 against Kentucky, 124 yards in that one. So if Georgia can get that kind of a production out of Branson Robinson, I think that they will absolutely take that. I do think that we are going to continue to see Branson be a bigger part of this running back rotation. I do think that, Wes, like you said, Kenny isn't really a running back. He's more of an all-purpose back in this offense. And I know that's a phrase that hasn't been used in recruiting for a little while. But, to me, they want to get him touches, but it doesn't necessarily have to be strictly handoffs out of the backfield, but between the tackles. I think they would prefer to get him out in space. Now, he may line up in the backfield, but he's probably going to be running a lot of those plays that Kirby, talked about earlier. They're a part of the quote unquote run game, but they are also, you're going to see those show up on the passing stats. I think that'll help get Stetson back in a comfortable position. I think that's probably a good part of the game plan for him if he is banged up and you want to get him comfortable. But then I also think that when it comes to the between the tackles running, you've got a guy like Branson, you've got a guy like Dejan. Kendall is certainly capable of that. He's battled some injuries, struggled a little bit with fumbles there. I think that they probably should turn more towards Branson and Dejan, the 1-2 punch that we saw against Auburn, and use Kenny McIntosh as that all-purpose back.
Yeah, that's no disrespect. I haven't really said Dejan's name much, and some of my friends are starting to call him Mustard, Honey Dijon. He's picking up some good nicknames right now, but he's been pretty steady. What's that?
The Gray Poupon.
Yeah. He's been pretty steady in Georgia's backfield too, so I don't want to overlook that either. It's just so many guys that Georgia's recruited and built up, and it's not Zamir White and James Cook levels of productivity, but Georgia's gotten really used to those 2 guys over the past few years, and it almost seemed like the new Dogs had to take a minute to start to carve out their own path as well.
Yeah, Wes, I think that is a very spot-on observation there. Is you come into the season, you're kind of like, well, who does what? And I know that I had made the prediction maybe my first or second day here. I said I thought Daijun Edwards was going to lead the team in rushing. There was part of that that I was like, he can. There's part of that was like, oh, this is interesting. But I also felt like when you looked at the injury history of Kendall Milton and Kenny McIntosh, that Dejan had a chance to stay healthy all year, where those guys didn't. I didn't have Branson Robinson in the mix at all. And the reason I didn't was something you brought up. I believe it was last podcast, Wester, last live show. Andrew Paul had a little bit of a lead on him. If Branson Robinson is as good as we've seen against Auburn and Andrew Paul had a lead on him, or was looking better, maybe Andrew Paul's got a really bright future at this here game of football. But I think that, like you said, Wes, the point here is that everybody has kind of fallen into place. It's almost like a zipper merge here, where you've got guys just kind of fitting in, getting in where they fit in, and they're playing well. And Dejan has kind of taken on a little bit of a bell cow role. You've got Branson Robinson doing the same thing. And then I think Kenny McIntosh, the way he's different than James Cook, and I'm not saying it's better than James Cook, but the way he's different is he's a good 15, 20 pounds heavier, at least 15 pounds heavier. He's a bigger back. He's a stronger back. And
he's got great hands.
He does. He's amazing hands. And so, you saw James Cook do some stuff between the tackles with vision and burst and things like that. Obviously, that big run in the national championship game. Kenny McIntosh can do those same things for you. He can also break a few tackles for you and run with some power, pick up those extra 2 or 3 yards there at the end of a run. And I think that's something that he brings a little bit different to the table. It's a very different group than last year, but it's one where, like you said, guys are starting to find their role, their niche, and not only them, but Todd Monken, Del McGee, Stetson Bennett. Everybody is kind of realizing this is where he can help us the most. This is where he can help us the most, and this is where he fits in. And I think that's a huge part to becoming a championship offense.
Speaking of good fits, I want to put a pin in that. Let's look at some really great fits over at breakingt.com. Our friend Sam Franco has a great selection of tees over at Breaking Tea. Stuff from the Mailman, Brock Bowers, Christopher Smith, Darnell Washington. I like the Burn the Boats. We haven't really heard that said too much since the season started, but I think Kirby Smart still believes that's what Georgia can do. There's a link to Breaking Tea in the episode description. Whether you're watching on YouTube or listening to the replay on podcast, BreakingT.com, the Georgia collection is as strong as it gets. Jake, you mentioned something about Georgia's offense earlier in the show, potentially trying to protect Stetson Bennett a little bit, but I want to look big picture at what Todd Monken's doing. That zipper comment you had kind of intrigues me here. When you look at the big picture of what Todd Monken's tried to do with this group of dogs, I'm not speculating here. I don't know. That the answer could be no to this question. But do you think that Todd Monken has had somewhat of a luxury in some of these games to almost test some things, experiment with some things, when a lot of people may be looking for Georgia's offense to have a certain identity? With some of these matchups here being as lopsided as they are, do you think Todd Monken's been able to just tinker, turn the dials, turn the knobs a little bit, and find out what this team is really made of for when the Dogs need it down the stretch?
I think some of that may be at play. Does it make sense to say that, to bring that tinkering element in while also saying he's tinkering maybe out of necessity because of injuries? I think Georgia's also really well-rounded as an offense to the point of, hey, listen, does it have the top-end wide receiver talent that Ohio State does? No, but it works the middle of the football field better. It's got a better playmaker in Brock Bowers. There are ways it's better than maybe an Ohio State or an Alabama offense, and there are ways that it's worse. But ultimately, there are a lot of different ways this Georgia offense can beat you, right? And the way I look at it as Todd Monken, the luxury he has is to come in with each game and to kind of figure out, well, this is where I believe we can attack them the best. And most of the time that's worked. It didn't against Missouri, and I still firmly believe it didn't against Missouri because of the fact that they couldn't keep Stetson Bennett upright. If they could have kept him upright in that game and kept him from taking so many shots, I think they could have thrown the ball downfield on Missouri and really lit him up. But Missouri did a good job of getting to the quarterback because Georgia's offensive line didn't play well. But I think, otherwise, you've got games where where they're doing this out of necessity, call it tinkering, call it experimenting, whatever. And then in other games, it's been, well, we feel strongly that this is going to work, like against Oregon. All of the quick stuff, all of the getting the ball out of Stetson's hand and going fast. And I think that, that was something that worked really well. I just think right now Georgia's got a lot of different knives in the bag where, some of those they need to start trading for guns because you're going to need them. But they've got a lot of different knives in the bag, really good ones, throwing knives even. But
yeah, they got some throwing knives.
Yeah,
and they're
get
taking some
you
target
something
practice.
that's gonna get you a pow there at some point, one or two or three, and I think they've got them. They just got to get them healthy and get them rolling.
Stetson throwing some hatchets right now too.
I can picture Wes cutting this part up and make it in
pow.
There you go.
Get you some throwing knives.
Let's hop over to the defensive side of the ball. Palmer, you had a really nice piece on this cat right here, Nolan Smith, and his decision to come back, I think, is paying off, specifically from the leadership standpoint. If it's not paying off a ton for Nolan Smith, it's paying off for Kirby Smart. He says he really likes Nolan's leadership, and Georgia needs that right now.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I said it last week against Auburn. Feel like it sort of applies here too. Feel like there's a breakout element that's still there for Nolan, still there for Robert Beal too. Had him as a player to watch this week. Vanderbilt not so great at protecting the passer.
What is Vanderbilt great at?
Academics.
Okay. I don't think they're putting any points on the scoreboard for that.
Yeah, but then they go and they throw a ball like laterally, way less than laterally against Ole Miss last week, and they don't even get on it. And you're just kind of like, I think it was Pat Forty who said this. He's like, man, for a program that has such high academic standards, Vanderbilt makes some of the most boneheaded mistakes on the football field of any program you'll ever see. And he nailed it. I mean, it's not a Clark Lee thing. They did it under James Franklin at times. They did it under Derek Mason at times. Like, I don't get it, but I mean, they kind of threw that game away to Ole Miss by not getting on that lateral because they had a chance to stay in it.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with that. Watched a little bit of the highlights of that game. Haven't seen a ton of that, but that was certainly one that was included. As far as Nolan goes, I think that Wes, you're absolutely right that him coming back has been big for Georgia. Creating a little bit of continuity on this defense where they didn't have a ton of it. I look at it and you absolutely see his leadership. I talked to him after this Auburn game, and you could sense how much he wants this, how much he cares. Said that he was choking up, at times. Jake, I remember, watching his interview with you after the Missouri game. I think he said something, said that he was going to cry there, said he was going to cry.
Man, very emotional this season, huh?
Yeah. Said that he feels like he wants to cry after some of these games just because he knows, how few he does, how few opportunities he has left. And I think that says a lot about Nolan. He expressed before the season, he came back to get a degree. He came back because he wants to leave a legacy here at Georgia. Something that he wanted to do was be a team captain. I think he's well on his way to that. He's been a game captain for 3 of the 6 so far. Absolutely, in my mind, is he one of the permanent team captains at the end of the season. But I think we've certainly seen Nolan Smith step up as a leader. Kirby said that when you talk about people that are going to do really great things after football, Nolan Smith is one of them. And I think that's some of the highest praise you can get out of a coach that really is sometimes not too full of praise.
I agree with that too, because I remember last year after the Georgia had lost the SEC championship game, it was between the SEC championship game and the playoff or the national championship game. And Nolan Smith, in like a moment of like vulnerability, was like, I've never won anything. Like, I've always been this great player. He didn't say that about himself, but he kind of had this thing like, hey, listen, I've come a long way, right? Like I'm a college student athlete, and I'm going to play in the NFL, but I've never won anything, and that's really what I want to do. Just on that moment of vulnerability, I don't know. There are a lot of guys that just aren't necessarily adjusted or comfortable with themselves or comfortable in their own skin as much to just come right out and say, I've never won anything. And that's all I really care about is just winning something. I don't know. It's just a brutally honest moment with yourself. And, obviously he loves the university.
Yeah, you're not putting that at the top of the LinkedIn bio.
Yeah, right. Brutally honest
anything
with myself. But no, and then to come back and to, be what he has meant to this team thus far. He's on pace to have a really good football season. And
he's had 5 tackles for loss so far this season. He only had 8.
They missed one too, but yeah.
8, yeah. 2 sacks. He had 4.5 last season. Sacks aren't easy to come by right now for anybody. But Nolan's trying to dial that one up. The one thing that I wonder, if it's a product of scheme or of where he is on the field, he had 53 total tackles last season. He only has 15 right now, according to sportsreference.com. Might need to cross-reference some of those numbers, but they're usually pretty accurate. 11 solo tackles, and he had 29 last year. So definitely behind the trend if you're looking at halfway through the year. And look, there's some post-game numbers in there too. But what are y'all seeing from his statistical standpoint of kind of racking up some of those tackles that he had last year versus this season, maybe not quite where he was last year in his production?
Well, the 5 tackles for loss certainly stands out for me. Going back and looking at, his game logs here, having one in each of the last 5 games, certainly impressive. Trying to find here and having a little bit of difficulty. How many tackles for loss did he have last year? Because
last year he had,
I believe it was 10.5.
I got 8. I don't know if they only count the regular season or what.
Yeah, I've got him down for 10 last season. According to college football stats, which kind of does a pretty good job breaking them down. But yeah, I've got him for a total of 10 last year with 3.5 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, a 1 punt blocked.
He had an interception.
Yeah, interception.
He had a fumble recovery on a fumble that he forced. Certainly was very impressive last year. I think a lot of that has to do with he is, especially with Jalen Carter out right now. If you're scheming up against this defense and you're scheming up protections, you're going to protect against Nolan Smith. Certainly that's where a lot of your attention is going to go. Whereas you couldn't necessarily do that last year with a Trayvon Walker, a Devontae Wyatt.
Yeah, there was nowhere to go last year for sure.
Yeah, he was opened up a lot because of the other guys that were around him. So that's not to say that he can't do it when he's not surrounded by other incredibly talented players. But I certainly think that factors into a little bit of the statistical drop off. And Kirby also said, last year's team, they were in a lot of, third and passing situations. They were able to rush the passer, and that's why their sack numbers were up. They haven't been in as many of those situations this year, where they're able to get their third down grouping on the field. Early in the season, they played a lot of teams that wanted to get the ball out quick on them. I certainly would with Jalen Carter and Nolan Smith coming after me. But I think a lot of it has to do with situational football and the guys that are around him. There's a lot more attention on Nolan this year.
There is, but he's also off to a better start than he got off to last year as well. He had 4 tackles for a loss and 2 sacks in the playoff. That accounted for almost half of his tackles for a loss last year and over half of the sacks. So he came on big when Georgia needed him the most last year, but he's also gotten off to a little bit of a quicker start, and he's kind of been that go-to guy that you look for a behind the chains type of play. I think also maybe getting a guy like Jalen Carter back is just going to help him out, just going to free him up to get some more one-on-one opportunities and kind of maybe keep teams a little bit more honest.
Yeah, Georgia's going to love to get him back for sure. And just because Georgia has a bye week next week doesn't mean that we don't have premium updates on the injury front coming up and on the recruiting front. As you see scrolling at the bottom of the YouTube stream here, $1 for a year at DawgsHQ.com for premium stories. And certainly want to take advantage of that. Jake had a good notebook session for all of our readers this morning as Georgia tries to get some guys healthy, but also looks ahead to some greener pastures perhaps on the second half of the season. Speaking of recruiting, guys, let's get into that before we chop some wood and wrap up. I thought Kirby had a pretty good telling reveal of his schedule each weekend, of how busy he is on home weekends and what all goes in to big visits for the Dogs. The guy doesn't get to stop just because he's coaching a game. He still has to keep the lifeblood of the program going. Here's Kirby's itinerary any given home recruiting weekend.
Meetings Friday,
night. We have meetings Saturday morning. We have meetings Saturday in the middle. We have some meetings Saturday night. We have meetings Sunday morning. And we have meetings Sunday afternoon before they leave. Just constant. We try to meet with every kid we possibly can.
And as far as this weekend goes, Jake Roos dialed in and gave me an update on what Georgia can expect this weekend. Spoiler alert, it's not as big as it was last weekend, but Georgia's recruiting week was pretty dang hot, guys. Here's what our DawgsHQ recruiting insider, Jake Roos, had to tell me about what Georgia did this past weekend and what you can maybe expect from some other names to pop as Georgia's season of recruiting continues.
Followed up a big visit weekend against Auburn with results, this time in the form of key commitments, as the Bulldogs were able to reel in 2 of last weekend's visitors on Monday. And both of these guys were priority targets for a long time for the Dogs. First off was Sokovie White, 3-star wide receiver out of Cartersville Cass High School, and a guy that Georgia has been watching since the summer. He came in, had a standout camp performance, and really caught their eye. Brian McClendon kept the heat on, and Georgia's able to close it out. Becomes Georgia's second commitment at the wide receiver position for 2024, joining Nikar. Really shaping up nicely for Georgia on that front, and kudos to McClendon early on in that cycle. But the big news, obviously, this week, I think, was in 2023, a major hit. Same day on Monday, they're able to flip 4-star running back Roderick Robinson from UCLA after just one single visit to Athens. His official visit pays off in a major way. Size, speed, power to spare. This guy has all the tools that the Dogs were looking for, and they stayed on him once they discovered him, even though he was committed. You know, they went out and put the work in. Was really impressed to see that they were able to get that closed in one trip. Major win, though, definite position in need, and I think that they can breathe a little bit easier now at the running back position. They'll probably want to take another guy, but Robinson, a huge get for Georgia. Now, as for this weekend, temper your expectations a little bit. I don't think we're going to be anywhere near the star power that we saw on the sidelines last weekend, but there is one guy that you definitely need to keep your eyes on, and that's Ryan Puglisi of Avon, Connecticut, in Old Avon Farm School. 2024 guy, and this is a guy Georgia was really impressed with over the course of the summer. Came in and camped with Alabama as well, earned offers from both schools right next to each other, and he's been a major priority since. I know he's a 3-star guy. People tend to kind of turn their nose up at that, but I caution you to do so with Ryan Puglisi. If this visit goes the way that many people think that it can, the buzz is heavy enough around Georgia that you should definitely keep your eyes open. So there could be some major rewards at the end of this one if it goes the way that everybody hopes it will. No question, Kirby Smart and company will be hoping that they're able to do that. So definitely watch for the Puglisi visit this weekend in Athens. Keep your eyes peeled. We'll have you covered at DawgsHQ on all things Dogs recruiting.
All right, thank you.
Oh, hey, was that a little? You keep your eyes peeled, like Chris Peeled.
I think that was
Roos might be dropping something in there for us.
Yeah. Jake isn't normally one to use the word play like that. He usually is a pretty straight shooter.
I thought you were about to say that Roos isn't normally a guy to use the word peel.
No, I've never heard him use it, actually. So he might not be. But I think you could be onto something, Jake. I think that Branson Robinson saw some of the or Broderick. Who am I talking about here?
Roderick Robinson.
Roderick Robinson. We had Broderick Jones, Branson Robinson. All right. Anyway.
Broderick Jones talked about Branson Robinson, and now we got a commit from Roderick Robinson.
That is why it all came together this week. I think he saw the attendance at those UCLA games and said, I got to get out of here, man. Yeah. I got to get out of this situation. This is rough. But a big week for Georgia nonetheless.
Yeah, no doubt. They need a 40,000 seater there at UCLA, but that's Rose Bowl's awesome. It's gorgeous. Hope you guys, I think you've been, Wes, but
I've been.
Hope you get a chance to go, Palmer. It's amazing.
Palmer, I like your chances, I think. As long as you keep covering Georgia, I think they'll probably be back there one day.
They got the home and home set. So
yeah, it's true.
Guys, let's chop some wood. Speaking of home, I'll start us off. It's homecoming weekend. And I think, if you look at Georgia homecoming games, obviously you want those to be secure by about the third or fourth quarter, and they typically can be against Vandy. But if you are coming in town to see the Dogs, I just want y'all to enjoy it, soak it up. You don't get many of these games. You don't get many of these perfect Georgia fall weekends, and it's going to be special. The parade going on tonight, which will be cool for all the families going out and about. I think the undergrads will probably get fired up a little bit later in the evening. But look, you don't get many classic city opportunities like this one for Georgia to host an SEC opponent. Say what you will about Vandy. It's shaping up to be a pretty special season once again. And if you see me around campus this weekend, or Jake or Palmer heading in, just encourage them, let them know, hey guys, we all have jobs to do, but let's enjoy Athens, Georgia on a homecoming weekend. That's what I'm passionate about this Friday as we are live right now. And as we head into another Georgia weekend, I just hope that y'all have fun and support the Dogs and soak up what should be a very successful, beautiful Georgia football weekend.
Very mild and very short chopping wood for me today. Listen to your head coach. Not listen to everything your head coach has to say. Don't always assume he's telling you the truth, because, they do like to be cagey with injuries. Kirby Smart telling us AD Mitchell could go back into the Sanford game, but, still hasn't played but one snap since. But listen to them when they talk about the players. And the reason I say that is because you hear a lot of people talk about Georgia's wide receiver room. They like to kind of bag on it a little bit. Well, Georgia doesn't have that guy, and this guy's no good, and this guy's no good. And, a guy that's come up in some of those conversations is Jackson Meeks. And Kirby Smart came out earlier this week, and Jackson Meeks was meeting with the media. He called Jackson Meeks a special teams demon. And Palmer wrote about it. But I want to talk about it because there's a know-it-all culture around the sport. And I fall into that category too sometimes. I think at least I give off that impression to some readers. Because if you're trying to break a game down with some film and you're trying to show something that stands out to you, you're going to come across as kind of absolute. You've studied it. You feel good about it. You're
the expert.
You're writing it. Yeah, you're the expert. But I didn't know Jackson Meeks was a special teams demon. I didn't know he was a great special teams player. A lot of other guys who study film or write about this football team, they didn't know that either. Kirby Smart came out and said it, and fans need to listen to that kind of thing, because when you're out there and you want to kind of, you're out there standing out there holding your Bud Light at your tailgate, and you want to talk about the problem that's Georgia's receiver situation in your eyes, and you want to talk about how the kid from Phoenix City, Alabama, just isn't a good football player. Kirby Smart says he's a really good football player, and he helps Georgia win ball games. And I think folks need to understand things like that and kind of take heed to them a little bit more often than we do. Just because he's not showing up in somebody's film review, or he's not catching 6 balls for 107 yards and 2 touchdowns on Saturday, doesn't mean he's not helping that football team. Doesn't mean he's not a really good football player, and doesn't mean he's not setting himself up for a bigger role down the road.
Yeah, I love that.
Well said, Jake. Well said. And I'm going to chop wood along similar lines there about listening to your coach. The defensive side of the football, outside linebackers. Talked about Nolan Smith earlier in the show. Hinted at Robert Beal there, and I'm going to talk more about him here. Kirby had some high praise for Robert Beal last week too. And both those guys are contributors on the defensive side of the football. Haven't had as many sacks, but like I said, like Kirby said, they aren't in as many third and sack situations. So they aren't able to go after those guys. It's not that, Robert Beal has lost his pass rush ability in the offseason. He led the team in sacks last year. It's not that Nolan Smith can't rush the passer. He was the number 1 player coming out of high school because of his elite pass rushing ability. So I think that there's a breakout day coming for those guys. Jake, like you pointed out with Nolan, he had a better second half of the season than he did first. I think that we talk about, this being the start of the second half here, that they're 6 games in, they've played half their regular season. To me, this is kind of the end of the first half, because you have the bye week to kind of turn the page, flip things over to the second half of the season. But this is also an opportunity to get the second half of the regular season started in a really strong way. So think that there's a breakout game coming for those outside linebackers and this Georgia pass rush.
Speaking of breakout games, we do our picks every weekend, and Palmer, you are taking, I believe, all right, Roos is taking Miss State and Kentucky, but you're taking Bama, Tennessee. You want to give us an early prediction here on how you're going to evaluate this game and our staff picks, or are you going to hold this one close to the vest for now?
I think that my feelings towards Tennessee are pretty well known, being from the state of Tennessee. There's a lot of loud Tennessee Twitter people. And I think that they absolutely are proud of their football team. There's nothing wrong with that. But I really want to see Tennessee play a good football team. We talked about it I think it was last show. We're talking about Tennessee, recapping that Tennessee LSU game a little bit. But looking at who Tennessee's played, Pitt isn't all that good. They lost to Georgia Tech. LSU's not all that good. I mean, they were down 17-0 to Auburn. Florida's not all that good. If Tennessee can win this game Saturday, I'll be very impressed. I don't think that they are going to. That 7 number is interesting, especially a lot of that hinges on whether Bryce Young plays or not. I think regardless, I do think that Alabama wins this game and covers. So I'll give you all that one there.
I think Nick Saban may have found the recovery pool somewhere for Bryce Young that just has the best minerals and salt water, probably in some hidden remote jungle somewhere, to get that kid's shoulder ready to go, because the Tide definitely need Bryce Young after watching that Texas A&M game. That is just huge for me.
I think that betting line lets us know that Vegas expects him to play.
Probably so. I mean, look, Vegas and myself, they haven't really been able to pin the Dogs this season. I'll tell you that much. Anyways, you can check out our picks at DawgsHQ.com. We'll have those up later this afternoon. If you're watching live, thanks to everyone tuning in. And thank you for subscribing on YouTube, on podcasts, wherever you catch this show. Much, much more where this came from this weekend over at DawgsHQ. Appreciate it, guys. Enjoy the game. We'll catch you, I guess, in about 48 hours, maybe less than that. Once this game goes final, we got this game canvassed. See you, fellas. Oh, and go Braves, of course.
Go Braves.
Later.